Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this brief update on Hurricane Fiona. Um, just, uh, just some of the latest information on Fiona as of midday today. Fiona was located at about 1,800 kilometers to the south-southwest of Halifax. The intensity was at 215 kilometers per hour. And the winds were the movement was north-northeast at 25 kilometers per hour. So what I have up here is the satellite representation of the storm. You also notice that we have a trough of low pressure that is located over the eastern part of the United States that is moving into western portions of Atlantic Canada today. What's going to happen over the next 24 to 36 hours is as that trough of low pressure approaches and moves eastward across the Maritimes, the tropical weather system is going to move up closer to it. The two features are expected to interact, resulting in an extremely strong and dangerous storm for Eastern Canada, starting late Friday into Saturday and continuing into Saturday. Looking at the model tracks, just to give you an idea of where the computer models project the storm going. Essentially, most of the models currently project the storm to track over eastern parts of Nova Scotia into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. On the bottom right here, you have kind of a zoomed in representation of that. So all the models are pretty consistent with having a landfall scenario in Nova Scotia. And here's the official track that actually shows where the storm is predicted to go. Now, we expect that the storm will be a post-tropical storm by the time it reaches here. That does not mean a weaker storm. That just means that the structure of the storm is different than a pure tropical system, but it will have both tropical and non-tropical characteristics when it reaches us. This is just a quick representation of wind velocity as the storm approaches. So by Friday evening, the storm is still well to the south. The stronger winds are located there as well. Even at 3 o'clock Saturday morning, the center of the storm is still expected to be offshore, but we're going to start to see some of those strong, potentially damaging winds move into eastern parts of the Maritimes during those hours. And even into Saturday morning, we're looking at extreme winds to the right-hand side of the track, with also potentially very damaging winds to the left-hand side of the track as well, which is characteristic. Yep.
We will need your screen shared. We seem to have a technical difficulty with the screen share. Nous avons besoin de votre écran partagé pour voir les.
Okay, I hit share. I'll try it again here. So I'll start over. Welcome to this quick briefing on Fiona. As I was mentioning earlier, this is a representation of the hurricane as of midday today on Thursday, with the position being 1,800 kilometers to the south-southwest of Halifax. The intensity is 15 kilometers per hour. Which makes it still a major hurricane at this particular point in time. And the forward motion is towards the north-northeast at 25 kilometers per hour. You'll also notice that we have what we call a trough of low pressure, which is a completely separate feature over the northeastern part of the US. And that particular feature is going to slide across the Maritimes over the next 12 to 24 hours. And as the tropical system approaches, both of these features will interact, resulting in a very, very strong post-tropical storm by the time it reaches us here in the early morning hours of Saturday. So this is just a representation of the model tracks issued earlier this morning. You can see that they're very tightly clustered in a storm making landfall in eastern Nova Scotia, either eastern mainland Nova Scotia or Cape Breton, before moving into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and affecting parts of eastern Quebec and Newfoundland as well. And this is the official track issued not too long ago, which shows the center of the storm tracking through Cape Breton. That would be in the early morning hours of Saturday morning. Now, you'll also notice that the potential track error at that particular point in time, early Saturday, is still anywhere from central Nova Scotia into the western part of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we'll have to keep an eye on that over the next 24 hours to see if there are any changes in the track there. There's almost always some little wobbles in the track. That's to be expected, but the track should be within that cone of uncertainty as it tracks towards eastern Canada. So what I have up here is a representation of wind speed. So by Friday, late Friday evening, we're going to start to see some of the effects from the winds from this particular storm, even though the center will still be quite a distance offshore. Those stronger winds start to move in the overnight hours of Friday into Saturday, and then finally Saturday morning, we're going to see some of those stronger winds still affecting parts of the Eastern Maritimes, and then moving up into Newfoundland and Labrador and Eastern Quebec as well. In terms of rainfall amounts, we're looking at anywhere from generally in the area that's going to be affected the most, which is again parts of eastern and central Nova Scotia, along with Prince Edward Island. We could see easily anywhere from 100 to 150. And again, we can't rule out up to about 200 millimeters of rain. We've seen storms in the past that have resulted in those kind of rainfall amounts. So this is total rainfall amounts by Sunday morning. And you can see even southwestern parts of Newfoundland and Labrador are going to get significant amounts of rain too, associated with the storm. In terms of waves, of course, whenever we have a storm coming our way of this nature, it creates significant wave heights. So we're looking at some fairly large wave action along the eastern part of the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia. And with that, we expect that that will translate into the Gulf of St. Lawrence as well. With those winds and with the low pressure of the storm, coupled with these waves, we're expecting some coastal flooding anywhere from the eastern shore all the way up into the Northumberland Strait, southeast New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island as well. So we'll be monitoring that over the next day or so as well. Storm surge predictions and coastal flooding is very sensitive to the track of the storm. So we'll likely have some better idea of the coastal flooding potential during tomorrow's briefing. So with that, I'll just sum up by saying the most important thing right now is to start to continue to prepare for this potentially dangerous storm and stay up to date on the forecasts at hurricanes.ca, and some information on how to prepare for the storm at getprepared.ca. And we also have our app as well that has all of this information on it as well. So we'll have another briefing tomorrow at the same time. Bonjour tout le monde. Ici Bob Robichaud avec le Centre canadien de prévision des ouragans avec une mise à jour sur l'ouragan Fiona. À l'heure actuelle, la tempête se situe à peu près 1800 km au sud-sud-ouest d'Halifax. L'intensité est de 215 km à l'heure. Et la tempête se déplace vers le nord-nord-est à peu près 25 km à l'heure. Donc, l'image que je présente présentement, c'est une image satellite qui démontre l'ouragan. Mais on a aussi un creux dépressionnaire qui se dirige vers les provinces de l'Atlantique. Donc, ces deux systèmes-là vont interacter durant la journée de vendredi. Qui va faire en sorte qu'au fur et à mesure que Fiona s'approche, ça va continuer à s'intensifier et ça devrait devenir une très importante tempête post-tropicale avant de frapper l'est des provinces maritimes durant la nuit de vendredi à samedi. Donc, si on regarde les modèles numériques pour la trajectoire, on voit que la plupart des modèles nous indiquent que la tempête va frapper l'est de la Nouvelle-Écosse pour ensuite se diriger dans le golfe du Saint-Laurent et puis vers la basse côte nord. Si on regarde la trajectoire officielle, on parle encore une fois, une trajectoire qui apporte le centre de la tempête près du Cap-Breton, en Nouvelle-Écosse, durant la matinée de samedi, malgré qu'il y a encore une possibilité que le centre se déplace sur l'est, plus à l'ouest dans la Nouvelle-Écosse, ou même possiblement dans le détroit de Cabo et possiblement même sur Terre-Neuve et Labrador. Ça. Donc, ça, c'est encore les possibilités qu'on regarde avec la trajectoire présentement. Si on regarde les vents, on prévoit des vents très forts avec cette tempête ici lors de son passage. Si on regarde vendredi en soirée, on a des vents qui approchent 160 km à l'heure au large de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Donc, le centre est encore très au sud, même au sud de l'île de Sable à ce moment-là. Au fur et à mesure que la tempête s'approche des provinces maritimes, on va voir les vents augmenter qui pourraient atteindre les 100, possiblement les 140 km à l'heure ou plus. Mais malgré, durant la nuit de vendredi à samedi, le centre de la tempête sera encore au sud de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Ce n'est pas avant samedi matin, dans les 5-6 heures du matin, que le centre de la tempête devrait frapper terre en Nouvelle-Écosse, mais les impacts vont se manifester bien avant l'arrivée du centre de la tempête. Si on regarde des quantités de pluie, encore une fois, c'est la Nouvelle-Écosse qui va y toucher du côté des quantités plus élevées. On parle de facilement des quantités qui vont atteindre les 100 à 150 mm d'ici dimanche matin. Ce n'est pas impossible. Il y a certaines régions qui pourraient même aller chercher au-delà de 150, possiblement approchant les 200 mm. Sur le reste de l'Est du Canada, on parle de 50 à 100 mm, possiblement un petit peu plus sur la côte sud-ouest de Terre-Neuve. Si on parle des vagues, avec cette tempête, on va quand même avoir des bonnes vagues qui vont s'approcher la côte atlantique de la Nouvelle-Écosse, qui va ensuite se poursuivre dans le golfe du Saint-Laurent. Puis la combinaison de les pressions atmosphériques très basses, les vents très forts et les vagues très importantes, on prévoit qu'il va y avoir des inondations le long de la côte. Les régions plus à risque pour voir ces conditions d'inondation le long de la côte devraient être la côte est de la Nouvelle-Écosse, tout le long du détroit de Northumberland, soit ce qu'on parle de l'île du Prince-Édouard, la côte nord de Nouvelle-Écosse et possiblement encore le sud-est du Nouveau-Brunswick en tant que d'inondations côtières dans ces régions-là. Donc, pour plus d'informations, vous pouvez aller à notre site web ouragan.ca et pour d'autres informations pour comment se préparer pour cette tempête dangereuse qu'on prévoit en fin de semaine, allez à préparez-vous.gc.ca.
Thank you, Bob. Merci, Bob. We will now proceed with questions from media. Please note, our meteorologist will not be conducting media interviews on this subject until after 3 p.m. Atlantic time today. Nous allons maintenant débuter la période des questions. Il est à noter que les météorologistes n'accorderont aucune interview aux représentants des médias à ce sujet qu'après 15 heures heure Atlantique. Please use the hand-raising function if you have a question. We ask that you keep to one question and one follow-up. We kindly ask that you ensure your line is muted when not asking questions. The following commands can be entered via DTMF tones using your phone's dial pad. *6 to toggle between mute and unmute, *9 to raise your hand. Veuillez utiliser la fonction main levée si vous avez une question. Nous vous demandons de vous tenir à une question et une question de suivi. Nous vous prions de vérifier que vous êtes en mode muet lorsque vous ne posez pas les questions. Les combinaisons de touches suivantes peuvent être utilisées sur votre clavier de numérotation. Étoile 6 pour couper et rétablir le son. Étoile 9, levez la main. Our first question is from Sébastien Lachance. Please state your name and media outlet before asking your question. Notre première question est de la part de Sébastien Lachance. Veuillez indiquer votre nom et le média que vous représentez avant de poser votre question. Allez-y, Sébastien.
Oui, bonjour Bob, c'est Sébastien Lachance de l'Acadie Nouvelle. Vous m'entendez bien?
Oui, Sébastien, je t'entends bien.
Good, good. Écoute, je ne sais pas si j'ai bien entendu tantôt un de tes collègues qui était à la télévision. Ai-je bien entendu, lui semblait dire que c'est possiblement la plus importante tempête de l'histoire en Atlantique qui va frapper cette fin de semaine?
C'est certainement, ça va être une tempête très importante, même probablement historique. Si on parle de la tempête la plus importante, ça c'est difficile à dire. Ça dépend comment on mesure ça. Du côté des vents, c'est certain que nos modèles numériques nous montrent des vitesses de vent là, qui pourront être très destructifs. Les l'onde de tempête, là, surtout le long du détroit de Northumberland, va être important aussi. Les quantités de pluie semblent assez comparables à d'autres tempêtes qu'on a eues, mais je pense que ça va être les vents puis les problèmes le long de la côte qu'on va surveiller de près. C'est ça qui va déterminer si c'est vraiment une tempête historique ou non.
Un suivi, Sébastien?
Oups, excuse-moi. Oui, Bob, écoute, pour ce qui est du Nouveau-Brunswick, la côte Est et le Sud-Est, est-ce que la tempête va frapper aussi fort que la Nouvelle-Écosse ou le Nouveau-Brunswick va être un peu épargné par rapport à l'Est du pays?
Oui, certainement l'ouest du Nouveau-Brunswick va être, je pense, épargné. L'est du Nouveau-Brunswick, surtout le long de la côte, ça reste à voir. Ça va dépendre de la trajectoire. Comme c'est là, on prévoit des vents assez forts quand même le long de la côte est du Nouveau-Brunswick même. Mais qu'est-ce qu'on va voir le long de la côte est du Nouveau-Brunswick ne devrait pas être aussi fort que ce qu'on va voir dans certaines parties de l'île du Prince-Édouard et l'est de la Nouvelle-Écosse.
Our next question is from Alan Cochran. Notre prochaine question est de Alan Cochran. Please state your name and outlet. Alan, go ahead.
Is it my turn?
Oui, yes, Alan.
Okay, Bob, I don't know if you can hear me. It's Alan Cochran from the Times and Transcript in Moncton.
Yep, I hear you, Alan.
Okay, I can't hear you. Sorry, I just wanted to ask basically the same question about the effect and the impact on the Northumberland Strait Coast here in New Brunswick, the Shediac area.
Right. So we are expecting some strong winds with Fiona as it's going through Saturday morning. Really, right now, it looks like southeastern New Brunswick might get some of the worst conditions as opposed to northeastern New Brunswick. Some of our storm surge modeling suggests that, yes, there could be significant storm surge along the southeastern part of the coastline there in New Brunswick, including Shediac. But as I mentioned in the briefings, the actual magnitude of the storm surge is very, very sensitive to the track of the storm. So any kind of shift in the track will have a major impact on what we expect in terms of coastal flooding, especially in that area that is on the fringes of where the stronger winds are going to be. So that's something we're going to be monitoring pretty closely over the next 24 hours. As to what that specific threat is in that area, but right now it is looking like there could be some pretty high water levels along that part of the coast.
Alan, follow up.
Okay, I'm having difficulties. I wasn't able to hear your answer. I'm sorry. So maybe they can turn me off.
Will do. Next, Alison Drous. Prochaine, Alicia Drous. Go ahead, Alicia. Alicia Drous, go ahead.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just wondering if you can explain a little bit, how does this hurricane measure up to others we've seen in Nova Scotia in recent decades? And are there any specific storms that are comparable to Fiona?
Yeah, it's always a very tricky thing to try to compare storms. Every storm is different. It depends on things like the speed of the storm, the exact track of the storm, the intensity as it's going by, because the intensity is never static. It's always either intensifying or weakening. The angle of approach to the coastline, all these things play into what kind of impacts we get from various storms. What we know about this storm is that it's going to be a very large storm when it does make landfall. So when we see a storm going through the transition from a pure hurricane to a post-tropical storm, we typically see those wind fields expand. So the storm actually gets bigger. And this is what we're going to see with this particular storm. So in terms of area of coverage, this is going to cover a fairly large area, very similar to what Dorian did 3 years ago. Will it be as strong as Juan, when Juan made landfall in 2003, where really there were some extreme winds, but they were concentrated over a small area? This storm is going to be bigger in size compared to what Juan was. But maybe a little stronger than what we saw even with Dorian. So like I say, it's hard to compare the different storms because they all have their own characteristics, but that's kind of a quick overview of comparing Fiona to some of the other storms that are in our recent memory, at least.
All right. And can you elaborate a little bit more? You spoke that, so it's switching over from a hurricane to a post-tropical storm, but you did say that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get weaker. So can you kind of elaborate on that? Because I think a lot of people just hear tropical storm and say, I don't need to.
Yeah, and that's something that's a good point. Something we've faced a lot is the concept of a post-tropical storm. Post-tropical just means that the fuel that actually drives the storm is no longer necessarily the warm water. It's rather differences in temperature, in atmospheric temperature between northern and southern latitudes. So when that happens, there's a lot that happens to the structure of the storm. It looks more like a winter storm, if you will, from a structural standpoint, than a pure hurricane that you see down in the tropics. So it's basically the transition from tropical to post-tropical is a change in structure. But sometimes you can have, if you have the right ingredients in place, like we do now with that approaching trough of low pressure, you get a re-intensification of that post-tropical storm. And that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're expecting with Fiona late tomorrow into the overnight hours of Friday into Saturday.
Next question, Richard Duggan. La prochaine question, Richard Duggan. Please state your name and your outlet, s'il vous plaît. Indiquez votre nom et votre média.
Good afternoon. Richard Duggan here with VOCM News in St. John's, Newfoundland. Mr. Robichaud, I just wanted to see if you could give us a little bit more specifics in regard to what Newfoundland and Labrador can expect with this storm, where will be hit hardest, and what sort of wind speeds, rainfall amounts can we expect?
Yeah, in terms of rainfall amounts, you're looking at the southwestern part of the province getting the most rain out of this. You could see somewhere around 50 to 75, maybe approaching 100 millimeters even, depending on the exact track of the storm, which again will be refined over the next couple of days. Wind speeds, that's going to be another interesting thing to watch for the southwestern part of the province as well. There will be a band of extreme winds associated with this storm just to the right of the storm track. So when I showed the storm tracks earlier, it's still possible that the center of the storm could actually come very close to the southwestern tip of the province. If that happens, it would put a kind of a significant chunk of the southwestern part of the island there in some of those stronger winds, which could be in excess of 150 kilometers per hour if that band of winds actually reach that part of the province.
And I've noticed that this is a slower moving hurricane than some that we've seen here before. What could the impact of that be in terms of potential damage that we could see?
Yeah, typically what we see when we have these post-tropical storms going through is that they move very rapidly. And this one is a bit different because of that interaction with the trough. So it is expected to slow down substantially as it's making landfall and tracking through the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So when that happens, given the size of the storm, given that slow forward motion, that will just prolong some of those stronger winds. So we'll see. It's not going to be a situation where we get 2-3 hours of very strong winds and then it kind of dies down. We're going to get that plus an extended period of stronger winds in areas both on the right and to the left of the storm, which is another difference in what we typically see with these systems, just because of the intensity of the storm. Typically, we see the stronger winds on the right-hand side of the track, which again we will see with this storm. But very often, some of the winds on the left-hand side of the track aren't really that strong at all, but that's not going to be the case with Fiona. We're going to see strong winds on both sides of this particular storm.
Our next question, notre prochaine question, Vanessa, please state your name and your outlet before asking your question. Veuillez indiquer votre nom et le média que vous représentez avant de poser votre question. Vanessa, go ahead.
Hi, it's Vanessa Lee with CTV News. Thanks for taking my question, Bob. I'm wondering if you can tell us what Prince Edward Island can expect in terms of which areas will be hit the hardest, along with rainfall and winds, please?
Yeah, in terms of Prince Edward Island, there's a combination of things. The area that should get the most rainfall should be eastern parts of the island. And we're just refining some of those numbers right now for that specific area. But again, we could potentially reach 100 millimeters in that area. In terms of wind speed, that's going to be very dependent on the exact track. Right now, we're seeing winds well in excess of 100 kilometers per hour. Again, that will be refined over the next day or so as we start to upgrade our watches to warnings and actually pin down some of those numbers. So in terms of a time frame, you're looking at Saturday morning for Prince Edward Island for getting some of those worst conditions. So and then you have the storm surge threat for there as well. So you got that triple threat of heavy rain, strong winds, damaging winds, and the coastal flooding potential as well.
Follow up, Vanessa?
What would your advice for people be right now?
Well, from what I've seen on social media, a lot of people are getting ready for this storm. There's lots of pictures of bare shelves and stores. Again, the main thing is to be self-sufficient for a period of 72 hours after the storm. So we're looking at Sunday into Monday and Tuesday. Some of the wind speeds that we're seeing with this are consistent with storms that have produced prolonged power outages. So be ready to be without power for potentially an extended period of time. And critically at this point in time is to stay up to date on the latest weather forecast, because as I mentioned earlier, there's always these little wiggles in the exact storm track. And given that everything that we're talking about is critical to the storm track, it's important to just stay up to speed on the forecast over the coming 24 to 36 hours. But definitely we're looking at some significant impacts across most of Eastern Canada with power outages, flooding, and wind damage. So it is going to be a very serious storm.
A reminder to please use the hand raising function if you do have a question. Un rappel de veuillez utiliser la fonction main levée si vous avez une question. We're going to go back to Alan, who hopefully has his sound issues corrected. Alan, please go ahead.
Okay, yes, again, thank you. Sorry about that. I was muted last time. Again, my question is the impact on our area here, Moncton, Shediac, Northumberland Strait. And if there's a follow-up, could you explain how storm surges happen when we get high tides multiplied by these high winds, which caused some big issues during Dorian?
Yeah, so just to make sure can you hear me now, Alan?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Right. So with the storm track going through eastern Nova Scotia, that would put southeastern New Brunswick on an area that is going to be affected by some of the north to northwesterly winds. So we do expect a band of fairly strong winds out of those directions. And that would be primarily during the morning hours of Saturday. And we're going to refine some of these numbers over the next day or so. But we could definitely see some winds approaching or potentially even exceeding 90 or 100 kilometers per hour along the southeastern part of New Brunswick. And that should be a lot less than that as you move further west towards western New Brunswick. In terms of the storm surge question, yeah, basically what happens is when you have extremely low pressure, the water actually rises. There's a bulge of water that is created by the low pressure of the storm. We also have the component of the wind that blows the water on shore, especially in that part of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, Northumberland Strait area. So the combination of the very low pressure that we're going to see with this storm and the winds blowing the water on shore, you end up with a rise in water level at the coastline. Now, if that rise in water level is high enough in magnitude and it occurs near high tide, then you can get some flooding occurring at these areas along the coast. Now, some of our modeling suggests that some of these water levels in the Shediac area might be actually a little bit higher than what they were during Dorian. But again, given that it's so sensitive to the actual track of the storm, we'll be able to refine that a little bit better in the next day or so to have a better idea of what those water levels would be in the southeastern part of New Brunswick.
Nous allons, notre prochaine question, Adrien Blanc. Veuillez indiquer votre nom et le média que vous représentez. Next question, Adrien Blanc. Please state your name and media outlet.
Bonjour, Adrien Blanc de Radio-Canada. J'espère que vous m'entendez.
Oui.
Est-ce que vous avez une idée de en quoi cette tempête se compare à Dorian qui avait causé d'importants dégâts dans notre région?
Ouais, c'est toujours difficile de comparer des tempêtes, mais si on regarde, il y a des choses qu'on peut regarder en tant que la superficie ou la grosseur de la tempête comme telle. C'est assez comparable si on regarde la tempête que Fiona, qu'on prévoit va être une tempête post-tropicale lors de son arrivée. Ça va être une assez grosse tempête, donc ça va affecter plusieurs régions, pas seulement près de la trajectoire. Donc, ça va affecter toute la Nouvelle-Écosse, toute l'île du Prince-Édouard, le sud-est du Nouveau-Brunswick, les îles de la Madeleine, même les parties ouest de Terre-Neuve et Labrador. Donc, sur ce côté-là, ça se compare en tant que grosseur, en tant qu'intensité. Ça a bien à l'air comme si que Fiona, lors de son arrivée, va être même un peu plus fort que ce qu'on a vu avec Dorian. Donc, ça, c'est des choses qu'on surveille de près durant les prochaines 24 heures.
Question de suivi, Adrien, follow-up?
Oui, pardon si vous avez déjà répondu, j'ai joué en cours de route, mais est-ce que vous avez une idée de quelle certitude en fait a-t-on de la trajectoire de cette tempête? C'est-à-dire, certaines personnes se disent, si je suis aux abords de ce cône de certitude, bon, il y aura beaucoup de vent, mais ça peut-être peu de dégâts. À quel point ça pourrait changer ou à quel point il faut se tenir prêt, même aux endroits où on pense qu'on est à l'abri?
Oui, si on regarde la largeur du cône d'incertitude, on parle d'une trajectoire qui pourrait, à ce moment-ci, à peu près à 36 heures de l'arrivée de Fiona, on parle d'une trajectoire qui pourrait être entre le centre de la Nouvelle-Écosse et l'ouest de la côte ouest de Terre-Neuve et Labrador. Donc, il y a encore du jeu là-dedans en tant que la trajectoire, mais étant donné l'ampleur de la tempête même, toutes les régions vont être affectées, peu importe la trajectoire exacte. C'est juste pour essayer de déterminer les détails de la prévision. C'est là que ça va être important de savoir la trajectoire.
Last call for questions. Dernier appel pour questions. With no further questions for today, we will end. To let you know, we will hold another briefing tomorrow at 1 p.m. Atlantic. Another media advisory will be issued a little later today. If you have further questions in between these two briefings, please contact 1-866-672-5463. 1-866-672-5463. Ceci, c'est ici que la période des questions prend fin. Nous tiendrons un autre point de presse demain à 1h, heure atlantique. Un autre avis aux médias sera publié sous peu. Si vous avez des questions entre-temps, veuillez appeler le 6 6 7 2 5 4 6 3. Encore 1 8 6 6 6 7 2 5 4 6 3. Voilà qui conclut la rencontre d'aujourd'hui. This concludes today's event. Thank you for participating. Merci pour votre participation. And thank you, Bob, for your presentation. Et un gros merci à Bob pour sa présentation.